The electric car. This is actually the Orion walker truck. Those guys at Meridian will try and tell you they've been doing the electric car for years, what we've been. This is 1911, so we've been doing it for a lot longer than they have. And it's a funny thing, the electric car's been around for a long time. This weighs 2,500 kgs, it's really heavy. Does 23 kilometres an hour, so it's sort of ideal for Auckland, not so good for Christchurch. Anyone laughing in Auckland? No, yeah, well, we think it's funny down here anyway. But the key thing is we're going to have a whole lot of new loads coming onto the power system, and how are we going to manage these loads so they're not on at times when the wind isn't blowing or when there are other big loads on the system. There are some estimates out there that people think that 20 years out, 25% of the vehicle fleet is going to be electric, but certainly it's a really big, important load which is going to add a lot of capacity to the system. There's an interesting question about whether we get the pure electric vehicle, like that is, or whether we're going to get the hybrid. Something like the plug-in electric car, which has also got a wee petrol or a wee diesel engine in it. If you go ask the pure electricity industry what they want, we want the pure electric vehicle, because if you've driven to Ashburton and you've got to Ashburton and the price of electricity for whatever reason is high that day, you're just going to pay it because you want to get home. I've got nothing against Ashburton, I just give that as an example. But it's that the people, like as an industry, we want the guys who are absolutely dependent on us. And that's what the pure electric car is. So I'm thinking commercially here, Susan's laughing away at me. But in many ways for New Zealand, with our hydro issues and our wind issues, we're far better off actually with the hybrid electric car, the car that's also got the petrol or the diesel engine, because in the dry year, you just price the electricity so no one wants to buy electricity, and you use diesel or petrol to run your vehicle and you never actually plug it in. So it's sort of an interesting public policy thing. If you leave it up to the electricity industry, what sort of vehicles we're going to get the pure electric. But I think the New Zealand Incorporated is far better off having the dual, if you like, the hybrid vehicle. Interestingly, I think the batteries for this thing weigh over, I think it's like 1.5 tonnes, some number like that. That contains the same amount of energy as about 5 kilograms of fat. So, the whole energy density of these old batteries is pretty hopeless. So this is one of the things we've been doing. This is the national grid now. This is the national grid. LNI is a Lower North Island national grid. You can see how it comes up in the morning and comes up in the evening. And that's on a relatively cold winter day. The UNI is the Upper North Island. You can see it's also got a peak in it. And then you come to the Upper South Island. So we've done this quite cool project over the last 2 or 3 years, where we now manage all the load control in the Upper South Island. So out there's about 200 or 300 megawatts of water heating, and we control that at Orion and turn it on and off to try and manage that load. So there's quite a lot of, I'm sure there's the speakers have been a little bit pessimistic about the electricity industry. Can I say that? No? Well, this is a really positive story. This is a story of genuine cooperation amongst a bunch of partners who wanted to cooperate to give better quality outcomes. So this has got the advantage that we've got, if you can imagine, like sort of jump up high enough, you can imagine if that had that same shape as we had back in previous. There's a hell of a lot more transmission capacity needed. There's a whole lot more generation capacity needed to have that same shape as the other islands. Well, it also means if you get a power system with a whole lot more wind, and the wind stops blowing, you've got a central guy, if you like, or a central woman, depending on who's on the desk for the day, who can actually pull all the switches and manage the load in real time. So it's a really, really positive story there. Other things we've been doing? We've been signalling our big major customers. Our big major customers all pay, in simple terms, during these grey periods, $2 a kilowatt hour for their electricity. So we give them a really, really strong pricing signal. And you can see here, this is Lincoln University turning off a whole lot of load and doing some pretty smart things at those times. A cool store is an ideal place to do this sort of stuff. Pork company have got some big diesel generators they've got on site there to keep themselves going when unforeseen events happen, like happened the other day. And there's a couple of hotels. So we've really seen this thing that if you give people big, gutsy pricing signals, they'll actually invest, and they'll invest in a way which overall makes quite a big difference to the load shape. The blue curve there is the day where we didn't have any of these, what we call these control periods. We weren't signaling these $2 a kilowatt hour energy. And the red, sorry, other way around. The red is the day we were signalling. I'm getting myself confused here. One's a morning peak, one's an evening peak, one we signal, one we didn't signal. I think you'll get the idea. Please nod. But what we've seen is actually, if you look at the numbers here, our major customers will actually reduce their load by something like 20% response to this pricing signal. Another interesting sort of result of what we've done here is all the key infrastructure around Christchurch, because we've had this really big pricing signal. This makes up about half my revenue from these customers, this $2 a kilowatt hour signal. The big customers who want to have a diesel generator make sure they can run. It's places like the hospital, telecom, the water people, all had big diesel generators, so when that big shake happened and the lights went out, all the generators ran really happily. And other events around the country, so when we've had some of those big outages in Auckland and Wellington, often the diesel generators, those places haven't worked simply because they never really run. With me, I've given them a really big economic incentive to make sure they're properly tuned and run really well. It's kind of an unexpected consequence, but it does. Imagine on that September the 4th, if there'd been hundreds of people hurt and the hospital had been full up and their diesel generator didn't start, things get pretty messy pretty quickly. Lastly, I was going to, this is always the cartoon that I quite enjoy, which is, there's always one when things go wrong with the power system. So it's got someone like me on an exercycle, working away really hard to try and keep the lights on. And this is the Mercury directors back in the days when those big cables failed, going to the CBD saying an experiment in consumer-driven power supply. I think it's quite funny. Well, I don't think it's very funny. So the question is, would we be better off with human-powered electricity? How does human-powered electricity compare? Does anybody have a feel for that? I've done the numbers. So if you assume the average human can produce, well, it doesn't actually matter. If you assume we're about 25% efficient in turning, food energy into electricity, the numbers work out like that. Even if you're just eating pure good old bread, about $2 a loaf or $3 a loaf, it works out at $5 a kilowatt hour. If you're feeding yourself on Big Macs, it's $31 a kilowatt hour. If you're eating restaurant food, about $100 a kilowatt hour. So if you're buying your electricity at 20 cents, this looks pretty expensive. If you want to buy the average householder's worth of electricity a year and you want to eat restaurant food, it's going to cost you order of magnitude about $1 million to stay warm and fed and be able to watch Desperate Housewives once a week. So I hope that gives you some insight how we think about sort of demand management within Orion, and the fact there is some positive stuff happening out there. And this whole notion that if we are going to have a future which has got more wind, more electric cars, we do need guys aggregating the load, guys managing the load to turn things on and off so we can actually bring more wind onto the power system and have more of those lovely electric cars. So that was a very quick thumbnail sketch. Happy to take your questions about electricity or earthquakes. Thank you, Susan.
All right.